Hello, Brobs. We're back with Triad. Um, a novel of the supernatural by Mary Leader. I've not been reading since I've been under the weather. Chapter 13. Let's see how long this is. Not really in a mood to read, but it's rather short. My euphoria was short-lived. Alan was in a foul humor when he picked me up in front of the glass tower. At first he drove silently, and I sat beside him, saying nothing, knowing that sooner or later he would burst out with whatever was bothering him. But it had to be in his own good time, not at my insistence. It didn't take long. Jim, it seemed, was having trouble in Kentucky, trouble that Alan, with his extensive field experience, would have avoided. Jim had been calling at various intervals during the afternoon for advice, which was difficult and frustrating to give over the phone. To add to that, Alan was having his own difficulties at the office. There, Jim was king, a neat, methodical king who kept files of drawings in perfect order. Those cabinets were Jim's special joy, and Alan's particular torment, not just because filing was a job my husband hated, but because Jim had his own peculiar system of filing that neither Alan nor Archimedes himself would ever have been able to figure out. Not even the secretary was allowed to touch those cabinets, and the only other person who had the remotest notion of Jim's system was the junior engineer, who was on vacation at the moment. Go ahead, I thought as he continued to fume. Why don't you say it? It's all my fault. If I were like any normal woman, none of this would have happened. But Alan didn't say it. Instead, with typical male persistence, he went on to bemoan all his problems at home. The storm windows needed painting. The mower should be removed from the garden tractor, and the snowblower readied in its place. Leaves were piling up on the lawn. My steam iron was leaking. The kitchen disposal had ground to a halt that morning. The hose was broken on the vacuum cleaner. The toaster wouldn't pop down. And both cars not only needed winterizing, but the muffler on his was beginning to go. And the tire was flat on mine. I sincerely hoped Mrs. Lemke's sour braten and dumplings would be ready when we got home. Mrs. Lemke's son had just been drafted, and as she dreaded the prospect of a dismal winter alone on the farm, she was delighted when we asked her to live with us at least until spring. Since Dr. Gordon had strictly forbidden me to drive after the mauling I'd had, he feared I might deliver too early, so he said. She always took me down to the doctor's office, and Alan picked me up afterward. The house was spicy with the odor of sauerbraten when we arrived, but Mrs. Lemke met Alan with more bad news. The pump in the floor cistern had burned out, and she was afraid there wouldn't be enough water in the standing cistern for her wash the next day, since rainfall that autumn had been slight. After dinner, Alan went glumly down to the basement to replace the ailing pump with the spare one, and I clamored after him with the work light, glad to be of some use at last, for all through the dinner I had hardly been able to eat for thinking of the trouble I was causing. Our increased expenses with psychotherapy and Mrs. Lemke precluded calling in outside help to fix appliances. Alan was fairly expert, but he resented the time it took. What a burden I was. I felt like an inmate in the house and suspected that, in spite of Alan's denials, Mrs. Lemke's presence full-time and Dr. Gordon's orders not to drive had been prompted more by the fear that I might be seized with amnesia while driving or alone in the house than concern for the baby. Alan wrenched the nails out of the cistern cover, muttering to himself that someday, if he ever had time, he was going to put in brass screws instead of nails, and disclose the murky pool that underlay the house. It was really huge, this cistern, reaching far beneath the basement floor. Removing the pump was not the easy job he expected it to be. Something was caught underneath, and he had to lean way over to get at it. all the while alternately cursing and directing me which way to hold the light. It wasn't easy, bending over him this way, as the weight of the baby unbalanced me badly. I clung to one of the supporting pillars to keep from falling, my arms and back aching, but I didn't want to complain. So much was being done for me, and no matter how much Alan grumbled, he never took it out on me personally. I wished that he would vent his temper on me, as he used to do occasionally, but now he was so pointedly kind and considerate, I felt like a cripple. As I held on, my glance wandered to the old stained mirror that we had taken from the ballroom and propped up against the wall of the basement. What an unwieldy monster, I thought, noting my swollen body with disgust. My face blotched though the mirror made it seem, wasn't too bad. I decided as I looked into my blue eyes gazing back at me, those eyes Rhiannon had so disdained. For a moment they reminded me of Percival's, wide and guileless. Then they began to narrow. Alan was hanging way out over the water, his back to me, his hold on the pipe precarious. The eyes stared back at me, unblinking, and I felt my hand impelled forward. No, I would not. Tried to resist, but the weight of the child pulled me completely off balance, and I fell against Alan, managing just in time to throw away the work light so that it clinked harmlessly on the floor as we both pitched into the cistern. Alan had us out in seconds, sputtering and soaked to the skin. Both of us. Ordinarily, we would have had a good laugh out of it. But he was concerned about the baby and furious with himself for not having had Mrs. Lemke hold the light instead of me. How could I be so stupid? I should have remembered you're rather unseaworthy at the moment. Then he noticed the light on the floor, the bulb broken. That was quick thinking, tossing the work light away as you fell, he complimented me. We could have been electrocuted. Good thing one of us had some sense. He took my face in his hand and searched my eyes worriedly. Are you sure you're all right? I'm fine, and I don't think it jarred the baby a bit, I assured him. After all, it's cushioned in water anyway. Maybe I had only imagined the face in the mirror and the impulse raising my hand. I might just have lost my balance. However it was, I had the feeling that I had bested her for the moment.